Welcome to tonight's webinar titled Managing Remotely. As we go through the session, please feel free to add your comments in the comments section. If you would even now let us know who's listening, just with your name, the company that you're a part of. We've had such an incredible response over the last few weeks as we've done these webinars. We've met some unbelievable people from different companies, different backgrounds, in different positions. And we've also enjoyed getting feedback from the webinars, just people really sharing that they found value in them. And also some valuable questions have come about as we've been doing the webinars, which we've attempted to answer. And ultimately, that's what this has been about through lockdown, is us providing resource and making our training and knowledge as accessible as possible to as many employees as possible. Now, one of the benefits that have come out of lockdown for us as a result to this webinar is we made a decision as a business to launch in the next few weeks a Be Understood podcast. And basically that will be to ultimately take these discussions and move them onto a podcast platform where ultimately employees, business owners, managers will be able to listen to content, sharpen their skills. And that's what this is about. We want people to develop in the workplace, no matter what their position is. We believe that no matter where you start in the workplace, with the right training and resource and conversation and thought, you can improve, you can enlarge your capacity, and you can grow, which is what we are after. So we're excited about that in the coming weeks. So tonight's webinar titled Managing Remotely, the reason why we decided to record this webinar was a friend of mine who's an executive at quite a top company in Johannesburg. 2 weeks into the lockdown, he gave me a call and he said, one of the things that we finding with our employees now that our whole workforce is working remotely is we found that some of them are really entering some identity crisis. And the reason he said, or what he put it down to, is he said the affirmation that they used to get in the office from their managers or even just from each other no longer seems to be there, or at least it doesn't translate via technology. And so then what he's found is his employees have almost now just been going from one Zoom meeting to the next Zoom meeting, as probably you have, and there's just no feedback. There's no affirmation, someone saying good job, putting their hand on your shoulder and communicating that to you. And so it's left a lot of his employees, at the least, with this sense of a crisis. So he said what would be interesting is to almost create a resource which would equip companies to transition their workforce to working remotely, as well as resource to train managers on how to encourage staff members, how to notice if you body language via Zoom, whether an employee is disengaged or looking down. And so that kind of started a whole process for us. And so our team then began studying and researching the topic and looking into this whole idea of managing remotely. And it's been an incredible journey for us, and we are excited even to be able to offer companies a solution where we can train staff, equip staff, as well as train managers on how to manage effectively via technology, right, on the various platforms. So now when we talk about managing remotely, is the ability to work anywhere, anytime. So it's no longer being restricted to the 8 to 5 check-in, check-out in the company, but rather you are able to work from home, at the coffee shop, obviously not now with the pandemic and the lockdown, but in general, that's what working remotely is. And it's interesting to note, as we've studied and researched this topic and got into it, that remote working is not something new. It's not something that's just come about as a result of COVID-19. In fact, working remotely was a trend that was on the rise. These stats actually highlight what the trends have been internationally, what the top companies overseas have been doing, and you'll see that most companies are moving and have been moving towards a remote working option for employees. Now look at these stats, which I found quite remarkable. At the Global Leadership Summit in London, they did a whole bunch of surveys with top business leaders, employees, managers, and they found 34% of business leaders said that more than 50% of their company's full-time workforce would be working remotely by 2020. Okay, so you can see that this was already a trend that was coming very quickly in the work dynamics, in the workspace. An entire 25% said that more than 3/4 would not work in a traditional office by 2020. So these are top managers, top business leaders, that ultimately the trend setters. We can say South Africa is potentially 5 years behind America when it comes to trends. And so we can see that this was coming, and it was coming fast. Then it says, PGI's global survey data shows that more than 50% of people who telecommute part-time said they wanted to increase their remote hours. So here are people that were already remote working part-time. We're looking at solutions to increase their work, increase their remote working. Additionally, 79% of knowledge workers said they work from home, and 60% of remote workers in the survey said that if they could, they would leave their current job for a full-time remote position at the same pay rate. So it's very clear that this trend is not something new, which is important to know that even once we get out, once there's a vaccine for COVID-19, this reality of remote working will be a very real reality for all of us, for business leaders, for business owners, managers, for us to develop as managers on how to lead remotely, as well as for business owners to make some decisions on whether they need to start investing in big offices and office parks and all that, or they need to start upskilling their staff and equipping their staff correctly towards this trend. Now, another stat which I found fascinating, and it was done by Inc., says that 9 out of 10 employees who have been exposed to some level of remote working, 9 out of 10 of them have insisted that they want to continue remote working for the rest of their working career. So it's quite alarming that remote working is something that is on the app, and it's something that's being requested and desired by employees. Now, something about the coronavirus that is so real. Now, like I said, this was a trend that was coming, maybe 5 years from now. But something that the coronavirus has done is the things that were inevitable now have become a reality. So a trend that was possibly going to hit South Africa in a big way over the next 5 years has now become a reality that we were forced into. And it's possibly because of that reason that we were forced into working remotely that we're experiencing some of the labor pains. And one of the roles I find myself playing right now with our current clients and business owners is to almost reassure them and say, even though there's some labor pains, the reason they're there is because we were, to a large degree, just trying to make this work. We were fiddling in the dark. We were doing something that we didn't prepare for. No one knew this was going to happen. 1 week it was business as usual. The next week, we were in lockdown. And the only way we could keep our businesses afloat was to go remote. And so even with my executive friend, when he brought the issues that they're facing, a lot of those issues have just come because we didn't properly prepare, which is something that as we research and study this topic and this trend, we see that preparation and equipping and training the staff is number one priority. So what I want to do in this webinar is I want to, first of all, highlight the advantages of working remotely, because it's very clear that the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. And then I want to look at some of the challenges, and then how as managers we can manage more effectively via technology. Now again, this webinar is an overview. We go into a lot more detail, and I'm happy to have those conversations offline with you anytime. And I encourage you to get in contact with us, share your feedback, email me, and I'd love to continue the conversation. Now, some of the benefits that are obvious about remote work. Number one is productivity. You can research. There are stats done by Harvard and Stanford University that have done excessive studies and research as this trend was on the rise internationally, and they show that all the stats point overwhelmingly to the fact that remote work leads to more productivity with the staff. Now, some basic, fundamental, obvious realities of why is you eliminate the daily commute. So you don't have your staff commuting at the very least 30 minutes to work, 30 minutes away. For some staff, that's an hour and a half with traffic, 2-hour commute to and from work. You eliminate that. So that essentially becomes work where they are sitting behind a computer and possibly replying to emails. Okay? You eliminate the spontaneous meetings that take place in so many organizations when you're trying to work and then your boss calls for a meeting. Now, I'm not saying those meetings are irrelevant for all the managers that are listening who are constantly calling on those spontaneous meetings, but to a large part, they are a waste of time. And anyone who knows that, you find yourself in meetings, and in the meetings you're discussing when to have the next meeting. But there is an element of focus when it comes to remote working, because when you schedule a Zoom session, it's not something that can be done quickly. Now, obviously, you can send the link in that, but you understand it. It eliminates Sandra's in the office, let me quickly chat to her. Meanwhile, Sandra's got a lot of work to get to. So all the stats point to increase productivity with staff, which is a benefit for the employer as well as the employee. The second benefit is flexibility. Now, one of the reasons why they believe this trend is on the increase is because of the millennials that are entering the workplace. And one of the things about millennials is they aren't about getting paid for just checking in on time and checking out, but it's rather about work done. And something that millennials love is flexibility, to be able to have work, but to have life as well. Why? I believe that the reason millennials want culture and a life outside of work is because they've seen their parents kill themselves day in, day out, 8 to 5, hating their job, coming home miserable with no life. And I believe that's ultimately rubbed off on millennials, going, why would I want to do that? And they are in the position now, with the advancement of technology, to make having a life away from the office a reality, because they are connected. They're connected, we all connected 24/7. Other stats say it's not just a millennial thing, but all ages are enjoying this move towards flexibility. To be able to go and watch your son's soccer game, to go and watch your daughter's gymnastics rehearsal. And so flexibility is something that all employees are wanting, and they're finding that with remote working. The third benefit is it's a cost saver for companies. So many of my clients that I work with, when I deal with them with organizational culture, one of the values they have is they feed their staff every day they have lunch, because one of the values is the social connection, the social interaction, and they provide lunch so that teams eat together and socially engage. Okay, and that is something that a lot of companies are adopting as a policy. You also then are able to control the lunch break and go from this time to this time. Hey, lunch is served, come and eat, but then you're back to work, right? So most companies are providing lunch. At the very least, companies are providing your tea, coffee, sugar, milk, and you know, if you are a business owner providing that, how much of that you go through. And so now with remote working, those costs are eliminated. Not only that, but if you have, let's say, 50% or work towards having 60% of your staff work remotely, you don't need such big office space. And so then business owners, you're able to cut back on office rental. Your building size can scale down. You can create hot desking in the office whereby the desk no longer belongs to Susie. It's a desk that is used in shifts, or when it's open can be used by anyone, right? But space then is cut down. Rent is cut down. The cost of food is cut down. The cost of coffee, sugar, and tea is cut down. And so these are costs that you no longer have as a business owner. Now, speaking to some business owners, they say, and the conversation is, well, should we then possibly provide coffee at our staff's houses so that they can have their coffee, their tea at home and be working? That's up to the business owner. But for the most part, it's a massive cost saver. It's also a cost saver for the employee, because no longer are they commuting to work. So you eliminate transport costs. A lot of them now can put on a smart shirt and join a Zoom meeting, so even their cost of their wardrobe comes down, which might not sound like a big major thing, but for a lot of the ladies it is. At least for their husbands are fist pumping all day long, right? They're happy about that. So it's a cost saver. The fourth benefit is, with all the stats, there is a massive drop-off of absenteeism. So the staff are now working at home. They're less exposed to germs, which is something we've become very conscious of as society. And so all of a sudden during flu season, they're not getting flu, so they're working. So absenteeism, the percentage of staff missing work, comes down. So again, this is a benefit to the employee and to the employer. And then just another benefit is you are now able to potentially hire talent from more areas than just a certain radius from your company. And so think about the potential of your business, where now your business that was even contained to Johannesburg can now spread to the rest of the country without the hassle of office space and rental and travel costs. Why? Because now you have a team that works remotely. Even if you just look at Johannesburg, your potential employees don't have to travel a certain amount or catch a whole bunch of public transport to get to work, and this eliminates that. Your talent pool becomes a lot wider. So that highlights the benefits, the advantages. Now, again, that goes a lot deeper. The stats are a lot more exciting to look at least I love looking at stats. But that is a bit of an overview of what you'll find when you research the topic of managing remotely. Some of the main benefits business owners are experiencing as well as employees are experiencing. this is potentially why 9 out of 10 of employees who've tasted remote working don't want to go back. And I think, it's funny, even having these conversations with people when the lockdown started and we went to remote working, when having conversations, I found that in the beginning, people were freaked out because they've never used Zoom before. They've never had a Skype call before. They've never had to connect, and it's a different way of doing things. And the first couple of weeks, there was a lot of just freak out about this new form of working. But it's amazing when you have a conversation with the same people after working like that for the last, 6 weeks. A lot of them say, I don't know if I want to go back. I think I'm going to have withdrawal symptoms from my house. Now, I also want to highlight something just quickly. We need to remember we also are in an exceptionally unusual time by having our kids at home, at least in South Africa. So don't also think of remote working as having to work with your 2-year-old son for the rest of your work career. But think about remote working when the kids are at school. Now you might be able to enroll your son into half day instead of full day, fetch him at 2 o'clock instead of 5 o'clock. But think about the time at home where you can work remotely, how productive you will be, and then you'll still have time to go fetch your son at 2 o'clock. You won't be sitting in traffic. You won't have had to run up your Milady's shopping account. So money's looking better. Your petrol account's gone lower. Your public transport account's gone lower. That looks pretty appealing. And so that's what I find when I have conversations with people is in the beginning it was a freak out, but now that we've kind of fiddled around in the dark and tried to made sense of it, it's actually something we go, I could want this. Now, I'm not saying, and with all my clients, it's not a case of going, hey, shut your offices, stop paying rent, put everyone online. No, but I am encouraging clients to think about potentially, even when a vaccine comes, even when we go back to a new kind of normal, even though it will never be normal, a new type of work environment, I'm encouraging them. Free up your staff. Offer options where they can come in twice a week for the big meetings, but the rest of the week they're working remotely. I also understand that in our country we have a problem with data and accessibility to data. And we do have people that don't have accessibility to the technology and the data. And that is a sensitive topic in our country. And so for that reason, I do believe it's important to keep our offices open and make provision for all the dynamics within our staff. But for those who potentially can be freed up, who have the infrastructure to work from home, then I really think it's a reality that needs to be considered. Now, what are some of the disadvantages? Now, these disadvantages go more into, a lot of it is personal disadvantages for the employee. I do think the advantages, although they're advantages for the employee, they also more suit the employer. But some of the disadvantages, number one, self-discipline. It does take a level of self-discipline to work from home when you have access to Netflix and all you want to do is Netflix and chill, right? There is that temptation. But I do believe that's where companies come in, and I do believe that's where there's a need now for training and training the staff effectively. Something I am very pro with all my clients is to treat adults like adults. So we're not running a teenager camp. Our staff are responsible adults, most of them with kids, with bills that need a salary. And so I do believe as companies, we can equip them with the tools on effective time management, how to have time management from home, because we understand time management by getting up, getting dressed, and going to the office. So there's possibly a new angle of what time management looks like. But I do believe then it's about trusting our staff to be adults. But self-discipline is a potential disadvantage. Second disadvantage, which I believe is a big one, is blurred lines, where people working remotely battle to separate home life from work life. And I do believe that this is something that needs to be addressed, and it's something that companies need to prepare for, which this preparation we weren't ready for because of the COVID-19. We were forced into this. But if we make steps towards managing remotely, allowing our staff to work remotely, then we need to incorporate company policies. We need to be able to have open discussions, open dialogues, communicate with our staff, and start to have conversations about how can we distinguish the lines between home life and work. And so, but again, I do believe that also comes down to going, we're leading adults here. We need to have these conversations like adults. The next challenge or disadvantage that is quite apparent is isolation. And so there definitely is, when someone is working remotely, feeling excluded, feeling isolated. But I do again believe that this is something that companies can overcome with training, with working with your HR managers, your HR departments, brainstorming ideas on how to create social interaction. Some of the ideas that have come across is before meetings, the 5 minutes before your online meeting becomes a social connection, just checking up on everyone. This is where I believe managers come in to ensure that no one's feeling isolated. On the other side of isolation is potentially you might have staff that are overlooked because you never see them in the office, and so it's no longer line of sight management, which is again something that managers need to be equipped in and need to be developed in, on how to even recognize talent, recognize work when you don't see it on a day-to-day basis. You don't see the person smiling at you or looking awkwardly at you waiting for affirmation. So that, I believe, is a management issue, a management situation where managers need to get involved. But that is a reality, and it is a disadvantage that people who work remotely face. The third one, and I'll end it, is that social interaction, which I mentioned with the isolation. But the social interaction, same thing. How do we create an environment where we still have a company culture, where we still are engaged? Some of the ideas are having a pizza virtual night. Now, I believe, again, is let's not shut down our companies and all go online and we only see each other via a camera. Let's have the social parties. Let's still have the end of year parties. Let's still have these good times. Let's still have a once a week check-in or a once a month social in person. But it's important then that companies are aware that these are some of the disadvantages and some of the things they need to address. Now, again, I believe it comes down to preparation. What I have found is we can't approach this new way of doing business with the old policies that we have, with the old company schedules that we have, the old company regimes that we have. So if we had meetings every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday as a company, now that we're online, let's change the way we do things. We need to change how we do things as businesses. We can't bring the old into the new. I was having a conversation with a potential client in the beginning of the week, and his business is highly dependent on sales reps, and he hasn't built any systems for the sales reps, it's personality driven. It's a certain personality type that sells the product. Now, let me tell you, he needs to change the way he does business, because even the idea of sales reps driving out, seeing customers, cold calling, going, I believe that's going to change. And so even as business owners, we've got to then think, well, how can we equip our sales rep, equip our sales team with the resources where they're able to sell virtually? And so these are conversations we got to have, and I want to encourage a conversation around the topic. Don't let this change scare you. Don't let your limitation to technology scare you and then avoid you from adapting. Because if you don't change now, you will have to change 5 years from now. Okay, that's a given. So that trend, it was coming, it's now here. But even after this pandemic, if you decide to go back to know how it was before, there will come a time where you've got to come back to this conversation. So have the conversation, educate yourself, train yourself. Now, managers, just some tips for managers and managing remotely. Number one, communication is the biggest necessity when it comes to managing remotely. And if you had bad communication as a manager when your staff was in the office, your staff working remotely, that bad communication is going to be highlighted times 1,000. And so this will require, if you used to communicate 5 times on a topic, up the ante, right? Because so much of our communication is lost via technology. Because the person can't always judge the tone via the screen, your body language via the screen, and all the other elements, the non-verbal communication cues that come when they're sitting opposite you in the same room, they don't have via technology, which means you're going to have to up what comes out of your mouth and make sure that you're constantly talking. The best advice is to have multiple platforms for communication. So don't just narrow it down to one. Use multiple platforms, but let it be policy, company policy on what platform deals with what topic. That's not to confuse the staff, but it's to departmentalize processes, systems, communication. So communication is number one. And we are happy to work with you when it comes to your communication, because it is a key over technology that needs to be learned. Another thing is you're going to have to check in with your staff. And so with them working remotely, there's no line of sight leadership, which means instilling a daily check-in. And it doesn't have to be, oh, you all sit down at 10 a.m. for a Zoom meeting. Just make sure you're checking in with the staff, whether it's over WhatsApp or Telegram, whether it's an SMS, whether it's picking up the phoning them, saying, hey, what are you doing? What you up to? How are you doing? Listening to them. But have a daily check-in via technology. The third thing, again, what we highlight with our other management programs is know your staff. So even when it comes to managing remotely, it's important to know who you're working with. And I believe that one of the factors that's going to become very real, it already is real, but I think that in my opinion, is this idea where we no longer manage our time, we manage our energy levels. That could become more of a reality and might be something you want to think about as a manager leading staff, where you start to have conversations going, okay, when do you work the best at what time? Now, I understand it might feel like, geez, that's a nightmare. How do I maintain that? But at the very least, start to have those discussions. Start to have those conversations. You don't need to instill everything, but it will give you information. Because there might be certain staff that work better at certain times, and I'm talking reasonable times. So if someone goes, oh, well, I really work well between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., okay, that's ridiculous, okay? But I do believe managing our energy levels is more of a reality with working remotely. So as a manager, know your team. Have these conversations. Talk to them. Hey, when do you find you work out the best? When are you going to be the most responsive to email so that I know? Okay? And let's have those conversations. This managing remotely will be a nightmare for companies who have treated their staff like children. And I mean that with total due respect, right? For the companies that have policies upon policies upon policies, and you would swear they're running a creche, managing remotely, you're going to have to have a whole culture overhaul. You're going to have a whole management retraining, a whole change of thinking when it comes to leading teams, because one of the underpinning values of allowing your team to manage remotely is that you trust them and you believe the best about them. And then the last tip for managers is this is a time, and again, it's also going to be a time where you are actually going to have to stop and take notice of your team. And so empathy is going to become so important, is that you're able to listen to your team, even more so over technology, that they can talk to you and you're not trying to solve their problems. You put off the leader hat, but you listen. You need to watch your team. So in Zoom meetings, pay attention to the little body language that there is. Notice if someone's sitting forward, engaged in meetings, or if they're sitting back, looking disengaged, looking distracted. They're possibly looking very distracted now with the kids at home. But in general, you're going to have to listen to your team and watch your team more than ever over technology. And the best managers will be the ones who are able to do that. One of the things we teach about is that vulnerability and developing vulnerability in your teams, because that develops trust. This is the greatest time. This is the greatest time to instill this in your teams, to get them sharing. And you know what's so amazing about technology? Is the introvert starts to feel confident, right? So technology, we become a lot bolder when we're not sitting opposite to someone, but we speaking to a screen. And so what an opportunity for us to get vulnerable as teams, to develop trust. And when there's trust, there's healthy conversation, healthy conflict, which leads to greater employee engagement, employee commitment. And when there's commitment, there's results. If there's no vulnerability, there's no trust, there's no conflict, there's no commitment. And when there's no commitment, there's no accountability. And when there's no accountability, there's bad behavior and there's bad company results. So vulnerability is key, but over technology, I think you have the opportunity to engage in technology more than ever. Because regardless of personality type, technology makes us feel bold. So just to summarize what we went through tonight, so listing the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages for working remotely. It's clear it's a benefit for employees as well as employers. So this is something that we need to embrace, we need to engage on. Equip your team with the resources as well as train your team on how to use the technology, how to work through the technology, how to communicate effectively through the technology. Equip and train your team. If you do that, you will see amazing results, because all the stats point towards greater team productivity, greater employee engagement, less absenteeism, less distraction, more flexibility, happier employees, which is a happier company, happy clients, and you're making money. The disadvantages, your self-discipline, which again I believe comes from training, because that's something that can be learned and developed, as well as your social interaction, the blurred lines, home life, work life. These are things that we can have a conversation with as businesses, unique to each business, but have the conversation. And then as managers, communication is key. These are some of the top tips. I hope this webinar helped you, just giving you an overview, talking about managing remotely. I hope it's a conversation that you're having, that you continue to have. And I would love to have a conversation with you. And so my email address is below. Please, let's have the conversation offline. But I want to thank you for listening, for being a part of this webinar. If you want any more information about Be Understood, our website is below. We'd love to get in contact, have conversations, and be able to work together. Awesome. Have a good evening.